Elena Vasquez stared at the encrypted message on her screen. The same 27 characters that had baffled NATO's best cryptographers for 3 weeks. While her colleagues rushed between meetings about advanced quantum algorithms and machine learning solutions, she noticed something they'd all missed: a pattern hidden in the spacing itself. The message that would either expose the greatest security breach in NATO history or reveal her superior's greatest oversight was about to be cracked by the woman they called the filing cabinet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The November rain pelted against the reinforced windows of the Joint Intelligence Center in Brussels as Elena Vasquez walked through the security checkpoint for what she hoped would be the last time as a junior analyst. Her worn leather messenger bag, a graduation gift from her grandmother, looked shabby next to the sleek titanium briefcases carried by her colleagues. The bag contained her most prized possession, a collection of handwritten notebooks filled with pattern recognition techniques she'd developed over 6 years of being overlooked. Major Harrison Cross barely looked up from his tablet when Elena approached his desk in the secure communications wing. The British officer's reputation preceded him: youngest major in signals intelligence, architect of the new automated decryption protocols, and the man personally responsible for streamlining NATO's cryptographic operations. His office walls displayed commendations from 3 different nations and photographs of him shaking hands with defense ministers. "Vasquez," he said without lifting his eyes from the screen, "your transfer request has been approved. Records Management, Subsection 4. You'll be cataloging historical intercepts and maintaining the archive database." Elena felt her stomach drop. 6 years of exemplary service, a mathematics degree from Madrid's Universidad Complutense, and specialized training in cryptographic analysis, and she was being sent to shuffle papers in the basement. "Sir, I was hoping to discuss my placement in active intelligence analysis. My pattern recognition scores were among the highest in my class." Major Cross finally looked at her, his expression suggesting mild annoyance at having his schedule interrupted. "Miss Vasquez, pattern recognition is handled by our artificial intelligence systems now. They process more data in an hour than you could analyze in a month. What we need from support staff is organization and attention to detail, not theoretical mathematics." The dismissal stung, but Elena had learned not to show weakness in front of superior officers. "Understood, sir. When do I report to the new assignment?" "Monday morning. Sergeant Kumar will show you the filing protocols." Cross had already returned his attention to his tablet, signaling the conversation was over. As Elena walked through the corridors toward the elevator, she passed the central analysis floor where the elite cryptographic team worked. Through the glass partition, she could see Dr. Marcus Webb, the civilian contractor whose quantum computing background had earned him immediate respect and a 6-figure salary. His workspace featured 3 large monitors displaying complex algorithms, and his desk was cluttered with technical manuals on machine learning applications and code breaking. Next to Webb sat Lieutenant Sarah Kim, a prodigy from MIT who'd been fast-tracked through officer training after developing an encryption-breaking algorithm that had impressed the Pentagon. At 25, she was already leading projects that Elena wasn't even allowed to observe. The contrast was obvious and painful. While they worked with cutting-edge technology and commanded attention in briefings, Elena would be relegated to organizing dusty files that nobody else wanted to touch. Her mathematical insights, her ability to spot patterns that others missed, her painstaking attention to detail, none of it mattered in an age where computers could process information faster than human minds could even comprehend it. The elevator descended to sublevel 3, where Elena found herself standing outside the archive department. The fluorescent lighting cast everything in a sickly yellow glow, and the air smelled of old paper and industrial cleaning solution. Through the small window in the security door, She could see rows upon rows of filing cabinets stretching back into shadows. Sergeant Raj Kumar emerged from the archives, a patient man in his 50s who'd spent his entire career managing classified documents. His uniform was always perfectly pressed, his manner unfailingly courteous, and his knowledge of NATO's information systems encyclopedic. Most officers treated him as invisible furniture, but Elena had always respected his quiet competence. "Ms. Vasquez," Kumar said with a slight smile, "welcome to the archives. I know this isn't what you were hoping for, but I think you'll find the work more interesting than most people assume." Elena managed a weak smile in return. "Thank you, Sergeant. I'm ready to learn whatever you need to teach me." Kumar led her through the security door and into the vast archive space. The filing system was more complex than Elena had imagined, not just chronological storage, but cross-referenced by origin, classification level, operational relevance, and cryptographic method. Each file contained not just the original intercepted messages, but analysis notes, decryption attempts, and follow-up intelligence. "The beauty of this archive," Kumar explained as they walked between towering shelves, "is that it contains patterns spanning decades. Modern analysts focus on real-time intelligence, but sometimes the most important insights come from understanding how methods evolve over time." Elena found herself genuinely intrigued despite her disappointment. As Kumar showed her the filing protocols, she began to see the archive not as a graveyard for forgotten documents, but as a vast library of cryptographic history. Every file represented a puzzle that someone had tried to solve, and many contained partial solutions that might prove valuable when combined with new information. Her first week was spent learning the organizational system and familiarizing herself with the classification procedures. Elena discovered that the archives contained intercepts dating back to the early days of NATO, including Cold War-era Soviet communications, encrypted diplomatic cables, and mysterious signals that had never been successfully decoded. The historical perspective was fascinating, but it also reinforced her sense of being sidelined from contemporary intelligence work. The other archive staff were friendly but resigned to their supporting role. Maria Santos, a Portuguese linguist, spent her days translating historical documents that might never be read by active analysts. Tom Fletcher, a former British Army signals specialist, maintained the computer systems that cataloged everything, but rarely interfaced with current operations. Elena's isolation became complete when she overheard Major Cross talking to Dr. Webb in the hallway outside the archives. She was returning from lunch when she heard Cross's voice through the partially open stairwell door. "The problem with traditional analysts," Cross was saying, "is that they think human intuition can compete with algorithmic processing. We've got systems now that can crack most encryption schemes in minutes, but these old-school types want to sit around with pencils and paper, looking for mystical patterns." Webb's response was even more cutting. "It's kind of quaint, actually. Like watching someone try to compete with a calculator using an abacus. I suppose there's historical value in understanding how things used to be done, but it's hardly relevant to modern intelligence work." Elena felt her face burn with embarrassment and anger. She retreated to the archives, but Cross's words echoed in her mind. Traditional analyst, old-school type, mystical patterns. They weren't just dismissing her methods, they were dismissing her entire approach to understanding information. That evening, alone in the archives after the day shift had ended, Elena opened one of her notebooks and stared at the pages of pattern analysis she'd developed over years of study. Her techniques weren't mystical or outdated. They were based on solid mathematical principles and careful observation. But in a world that valued speed over understanding, processing power over insight, her skills seemed as obsolete as Kumar's filing cabinets. She was about to close the notebook when something caught her attention. On her desk was a stack of "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, Subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Files that Kumar had asked her to cross-reference intercepts from the past month that had been classified as unresolved and sent to the archives for storage. Most were routine communications that had been partially decoded, but contained no actionable intelligence. But one file made Elena pause. The intercept was only 3 weeks old, which seemed too recent for archival storage. According to the attached paperwork, it had been reviewed by both the automated systems and the elite analysis team, then classified as indecipherable and marked for storage pending future technological advances. Elena opened the file and found herself looking at 27 characters that had been intercepted from a secure communication channel. The metadata indicated it had been transmitted using an unknown encryption method, but what struck Elena immediately wasn't the characters themselves, it was their arrangement on the page. While her colleagues had focused on trying to crack the encryption algorithm, Elena noticed something else entirely. The spacing between character groups wasn't random. There was a subtle pattern in the gaps, a rhythm that reminded her of something she'd seen in historical files. Her pulse quickened as she realized she might be looking at a technique that predated modern encryption entirely, something so old that contemporary analysts wouldn't even think to look for it. Elena pulled out her notebook and began sketching the character spacing, measuring the gaps with the precision that had earned her top marks in pattern recognition training. As she worked, she felt the familiar thrill of discovery that had drawn her to cryptographic analysis in the first place. Major Cross and Dr. Webb could have their quantum computers and machine learning algorithms. Sometimes the most sophisticated problems required the most fundamental solutions. She was so absorbed in her analysis that she didn't notice Sergeant Kumar returning to the archives until he spoke from behind her shoulder. "Working late, Ms. Vasquez." Elena looked up, suddenly aware that she'd been hunched over her desk for 2 hours. "Sorry, Sergeant. I found this recent file and something about it seemed familiar. I was just trying to understand why it had been sent to archives so quickly." Kumar glanced at the file number and frowned. "That's classified as a priority intercept. It shouldn't be down here unless—" He paused, studying the paperwork more carefully. "Unless the analysis team has completely given up on it." Elena felt a chill of realization. If this message was important enough to be classified as priority, and if the best cryptographers in NATO had declared it unsolvable, then what she was looking at represented either a complete intelligence failure or an opportunity that nobody else had recognized. Kumar seemed to read her thoughts. "Ms. Vasquez, I've been working in intelligence for 30 years, and I've learned that sometimes the most important discoveries come from the least expected places. If you think you see something in that file, you should trust your instincts." Elena looked down at her notebook, where the pattern was becoming clearer with each measurement. The spacing wasn't random, it was deliberate, purposeful, and based on a system that predated everything her colleagues had been trained to recognize. For the first time since her transfer to the archives, she felt like she might actually be exactly where she was supposed to be. The message that had stumped NATO's best minds was about to reveal its secrets to the woman they dismissed as a filing clerk. But Elena had no way of knowing that cracking this particular code would expose a threat that could reshape the entire balance of power in Europe, or that her discovery would force everyone who'd underestimated her to confront the difference between processing information and truly understanding it. As she prepared to leave the archives that night, Elena placed the file in her secure desk drawer. Tomorrow she would begin the painstaking work of unraveling a mystery that had defeated computers and confounded experts. It was exactly the kind of challenge that had drawn her to intelligence work in the first place, and for the first time in weeks, she felt genuinely excited about coming to work. Major Cross and his team could keep their automated systems and their artificial intelligence. Elena Vasquez was about to demonstrate that sometimes the most powerful tool in cryptographic analysis wasn't a computer at all, It was a human mind trained to see what others had learned to ignore. Elena arrived at the archives before dawn, her mind racing with possibilities about the intercepted message. The security guard nodded as she badged through the checkpoint, accustomed to her early arrival schedule. The basement corridors were empty, lit only by emergency lighting that cast long shadows between the filing rooms. In the privacy of the archive vault, Elena spread her materials across the metal desk. The mysterious 27 characters stared back at her from the printout, their arrangement now familiar after yesterday's initial analysis. Her notebooks lay open beside the file, pages covered with measurements and preliminary sketches of the spacing patterns she'd identified. The morning passed quickly as Elena immersed herself in historical precedents. She pulled files dating back to the 1960s, searching for similar spacing techniques in Cold War communications. The archive's organizational system, which had seemed tedious during her first week, now proved invaluable. Kumar's meticulous cross-referencing allowed her to trace cryptographic evolution across decades of intercepted communications. Around 10:30, she discovered something significant. A 1967 intercept from East Germany showed similar spacing characteristics, though the actual encryption method was different. The accompanying analysis notes, written by a long-retired cryptographer named Dr. Heinrich Müller, mentioned something called interval masking, a technique where the real message was hidden not in the characters themselves, but in the mathematical relationships between their positions. Elena felt her pulse accelerate. Interval masking predated computer-based encryption by decades. It was a purely mathematical approach that relied on human pattern recognition rather than algorithmic processing. No wonder the automated systems had failed to crack it. They were looking for digital signatures and computational patterns, not spatial mathematics. She was so absorbed in her research that she didn't notice Sergeant Kumar approaching until he cleared his throat softly. "Ms. Vasquez, you've been here for 5 hours without a break. Are you finding something interesting in those historical files?" Elena looked up, realizing her back ached from hunching over documents. "Sergeant, I think I'm onto something with that recent intercept. Have you ever heard of interval masking?" Kumar's eyebrows rose with genuine interest. "Not by that specific name, but I remember hearing about spatial encryption techniques during my early training. They were considered obsolete by the time I started working here." Elena showed him her notebook sketches, explaining how the character spacing in the recent intercept matched patterns from decades-old communications. Kumar studied the diagrams with the careful attention of someone who understood the value of thorough analysis. "This is fascinating work, Ms. Vasquez. Have you shared these findings with the analysis team upstairs?" Elena hesitated. The thought of approaching Major Cross with her theories filled her with dread. "I'm not sure they'd be interested in historical techniques, especially coming from someone in archives." Kumar gave her a knowing look. "Ms. Vasquez, in my experience, the most important discoveries often come from unexpected sources. But I understand your reluctance. Perhaps you should develop your analysis further before presenting it." Elena spent the remainder of the morning refining her understanding of interval masking. The technique was elegant in its simplicity. Messages were encoded not through character substitution, but through precise mathematical spacing that created patterns readable only to those who knew what to look for. It was cryptography that predated computers, designed for human minds rather than digital processing. By early afternoon, she had made enough progress to attempt a partial decryption. The spacing intervals in the mysterious message, when converted to numerical values and processed through interval masking mathematics, began yielding recognizable patterns. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked through the calculations, aware that she might be the first person to successfully interpret this communication. The first breakthrough came at 2:15. Elena had been working on the assumption that the intervals represented a substitution cipher when she realized they might be coordinate references instead. When she applied geographic conversion formulas to the spacing values, several combinations produced coordinates that fell within European territories. Her excitement was interrupted by voices in the corridor outside the archives. Through the small window in the security door, Elena could see Major Cross walking with Dr. Webb and Lieutenant Kim. Their conversation was animated, and even through the soundproof door, she could sense frustration in their gestures. Elena moved closer to the door, curiosity overcoming her usual caution. The group had stopped just outside the archives, apparently continuing a discussion that had started elsewhere. 3 weeks, and we're no closer to cracking that intercept than when we started, Cross was saying, his voice carrying the edge of professional embarrassment. The automated systems have run every known algorithm, and even Webb's quantum processing approaches have yielded nothing. Dr. Webb shook his head grimly. It's not that the encryption is sophisticated. It's that it doesn't follow any recognizable digital pattern. It's almost like it predates modern cryptographic theory entirely. Lieutenant Kim added, the intelligence value could be enormous, sir. The intercept originated from a known hostile network, and the timing suggests it might be related to the upcoming NATO summit in Berlin. If we can't crack it soon, we might miss a critical security threat. Elena felt her stomach clench. The message she'd been analyzing wasn't just an academic exercise. It was an active intelligence priority with potential implications for NATO security. Her partial success with interval masking suddenly took on much greater significance. Cross lowered his voice, but Elena could still make out his words. The deputy director is asking daily updates on our progress. If we can't deliver results by the end of the week, this intercept gets classified as indecipherable and filed away. The credibility of our entire analysis program is at stake. The group moved away, but Elena remained frozen by the door. She was holding pieces of a puzzle that the best cryptographers in NATO couldn't solve, and they were running out of time to find the solution. Her theoretical analysis had suddenly become a race against both the clock and institutional expectations. Elena returned to her desk with renewed urgency. If the timing was related to the Berlin summit, scheduled for the following week, then every hour mattered. She spread out maps of Europe alongside her calculations, trying to determine whether the coordinates she'd derived from the spacing intervals corresponded to any strategically significant locations. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Elena had been working with the assumption that the coordinates were static positions when she realized they might represent movement patterns instead. When she plotted the coordinate sequences chronologically, they formed a route that began in Eastern Europe and terminated in Berlin. Her breath caught as the implications became clear. The intercepted message wasn't just communication, it was operational planning. The interval masking was hiding movement coordinates, timing sequences, and what appeared to be target identifications. If her analysis was correct, someone was planning something significant in Berlin during the NATO summit. Elena worked feverishly through the afternoon, cross-referencing her coordinate calculations with intelligence databases accessible through the archive systems. The route she'd identified passed through 3 different countries with timing sequences that suggested coordination with the summit schedule. But the final coordinates, those that terminated in Berlin, pointed to locations that made her blood run cold. The target coordinates weren't military installations or government buildings. They were civilian infrastructure transportation hubs, communication centers, and power distribution facilities. The kind of targets that would maximize disruption and public impact during a high-profile international gathering. By 6 o'clock, Elena had assembled enough evidence to be certain of 2 things. Her interval masking analysis was correct, and the intercepted message contained operational plans for what appeared to be coordinated attacks during the NATO summit. The question was whether anyone would believe her. The archive office was empty except for Elena as evening approached. Kumar had left at his usual time, after checking whether she needed anything for her continued research. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Elena stared at her notebooks, filled with calculations that could prevent a catastrophe or be dismissed as the fantasy of an overeager archive clerk. She thought about Major Cross's dismissive comments, about traditional analysts and mystical patterns, Dr. Webb's comparison of human analysis to using an abacus against a calculator, Lieutenant Kim's confidence in automated systems and quantum processing. They had all the technological advantages, all the institutional support, all the professional credibility. But they were looking for digital signatures in an analog puzzle. Elena made a decision that would either validate her entire career or end it permanently. She began preparing a comprehensive report that documented her interval masking analysis, her coordinate calculations, and her intelligence conclusions. Every step was carefully footnoted with historical precedents and mathematical justifications. She included photocopies of the 1967 East German intercept and Dr. Muller's original notes about spatial encryption techniques. The report took her 3 hours to complete. When she finished, Elena had produced a document that was either the most important intelligence analysis of her career or the most elaborate demonstration of analytical overreach in NATO history. The possibility that she was wrong about everything gnawed at her, but the possibility that she was right and chose to remain silent was far worse. At 9:30 that evening, Elena placed the sealed report in the secure communication system, with routing instructions for Major Cross's immediate attention. The timestamp would show that it had been submitted outside normal business hours, reinforcing the impression that she was either deeply committed to her analysis or dangerously obsessed with proving herself. As she gathered her materials and prepared to leave the archives, Elena reflected on the irony of her situation. The woman who had been dismissed as too traditional, too slow, too focused on obsolete techniques had potentially cracked a code that defeated the most advanced cryptographic systems NATO possessed. The spacing patterns that her colleagues would dismiss as mystical had revealed operational plans that could reshape European security. Elena turned off the lights and locked the archive vault, knowing that tomorrow would bring either vindication or professional humiliation. Her interval masking analysis would either prove that human insight could triumph over algorithmic processing, or demonstrate that archive clerks should stick to filing documents rather than attempting intelligence analysis. The message that had stumped NATO's elite cryptographers for 3 weeks was about to test whether institutional bias was stronger than analytical truth. Elena Vasquez walked through the empty corridors of the intelligence center, carrying the weight of knowledge that could save lives or destroy her career, depending entirely on whether anyone would listen to the woman they'd relegated to the basement. Elena arrived at the archives the next morning to find a message waiting on her secure terminal. Major Cross had requested her immediate presence in Conference Room 7 for an emergency briefing. Her stomach lurched as she realized her report had not only been read, but had generated enough concern to warrant a formal meeting. The timestamp on the message indicated it had been sent at 6:30 in the morning, suggesting that Cross had reviewed her analysis in the early hours. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt interminable. Elena clutched her leather messenger bag, which now contained additional documentation she'd prepared overnight to support her interval masking analysis. She had barely slept, alternating between confidence in her mathematical calculations and terror that she had fundamentally misunderstood something crucial. Conference Room 7 was one of the smaller secure meeting spaces, equipped with electromagnetic shielding and sound dampening that made sensitive discussions impossible to monitor. When Elena entered, she found Major Cross seated at the head of the polished table, flanked by Dr. Webb and Lieutenant Kim. Their expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. "Ms. Vasquez," Cross began without preamble, "your report makes some extraordinary claims about that archived intercept. Claims that, if true, would suggest our entire analytical approach has been fundamentally flawed. Elena took her assigned seat at the far end of the table, acutely aware of the physical distance separating her from the others. "Sir, my analysis indicates that the encryption method predates modern digital cryptography. The automated systems. We're looking for computational patterns that simply aren't present in interval masking techniques." Dr. Webb leaned forward, his expression conveying barely contained skepticism. "Ms. Vasquez, with respect, interval masking was abandoned decades ago because it's inherently insecure and extremely limited in application. The idea that hostile intelligence services would revert to such primitive methods is frankly absurd." Lieutenant Kim nodded in agreement. "Our quantum processing systems have tested every known historical encryption method. If interval masking were present in that intercept, the algorithms would have detected it immediately." Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks but forced herself to respond calmly. "Ma'am, with respect, the quantum systems are designed to recognize digital signatures and computational patterns. Interval masking operates through spatial mathematics that don't translate to algorithmic analysis. It's designed specifically to be invisible to automated processing." Cross tapped his stylus against his tablet, a gesture Elena had learned to recognize as indicating impatience. "Ms. Vasquez, let's assume for a moment that your analysis is correct. Your report suggests this intercept contains operational plans for coordinated attacks during the Berlin summit. That's an intelligence conclusion of the highest magnitude. What makes you qualified to make such assessments?" The question struck at Elena's deepest insecurity about her position and credentials. She was acutely aware that she had no formal training in threat assessment or operational intelligence. Her expertise was mathematical analysis, not strategic interpretation. But the coordinates she'd derived from the spacing patterns were undeniably pointing to infrastructure targets in Berlin during the summit timeframe. "Sir, I understand that my conclusions exceed my typical responsibilities, but the mathematical evidence is compelling. The coordinate sequences form a coherent pattern that correlates with both the summit schedule and strategic infrastructure. Locations. I've documented every calculation and cross-referenced the results with historical precedents." Elena opened her messenger bag and withdrew additional documentation she'd prepared. Maps showing the coordinate routes, timing calculations based on the spacing intervals, and comparative analysis with confirmed interval masking examples from the archives. She spread the materials across the table, her hands steady despite her internal nervousness. Dr. Webb glanced at the documents with obvious disdain. "Ms. Vasquez, pattern recognition isn't the same as intelligence analysis. Finding mathematical correlations doesn't prove operational intent. You're making enormous logical leaps based on spatial arrangements that could be completely coincidental." Elena felt her carefully controlled composure beginning to crack. "Dr. Webb, the probability of these correlations being coincidental is mathematically negligible. The coordinate precision, the timing sequences, the target selection patterns, they form a coherent operational framework that can't be explained by chance." Lieutenant Kim interjected, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously in professional discussions. "Ms. Vasquez, even if we accepted your interval masking analysis, your threat assessment lacks credible supporting intelligence. You're proposing that we alert security services across Europe based on spatial mathematics performed by an archive clerk." The dismissal was brutal in its casual efficiency. Archive clerk. Elena felt the weight of every assumption about her capabilities, every institutional bias that had relegated her to filing documents while others made decisions that affected international security. But she also felt something else, absolute certainty that her analysis was correct. "Lieutenant Kim, I understand the limitations of my position and experience. But the mathematics don't lie, and the evidence points to imminent threats against civilian infrastructure during the Berlin summit. Whether that analysis comes from an archive clerk or the director of intelligence doesn't change the validity of the conclusions. Major Cross set down his stylus and fixed Elena with a stare. That seemed designed to intimidate. Ms. Vasquez, you've made serious allegations about our analytical capabilities and proposed threat assessments that would require coordination with multiple intelligence agencies. Your recommendations would divert significant resources based entirely on your interpretation of spacing patterns in a message that our best cryptographers have declared indecipherable. Elena realized that this wasn't just a review of her analysis. It was a test of her willingness to back down when challenged by authority. The comfortable option would be to acknowledge the limitations of her position, defer to superior expertise, and return to filing documents in the basement. But the coordinates pointing to Berlin infrastructure remained mathematically valid, regardless of who had calculated them. Sir, I stand by my analysis. The interval masking interpretation is mathematically sound. The coordinate calculations are verifiable, and the threat assessment follows logically from the evidence. I understand that my conclusions challenge established procedures, but the mathematics speak for themselves. The silence that followed was loaded with tension. Dr. Webb exchanged glances with Lieutenant Kim, both clearly expecting Elena to retreat when confronted with unified professional opposition. Major Cross studied her with what might have been grudging respect for her persistence, or calculation about how to handle an insubordinate subordinate. Elena decided to take the offensive. Sir, may I ask what alternative explanations the analysis team has developed for the intercept? If interval masking is incorrect, what encryption method accounts for the specific character arrangements and spacing patterns? The question hit its mark. Dr. Webb shifted uncomfortably, and Lieutenant Kim looked toward Major Cross for guidance. The truth was that they had no alternative explanations, only the certainty that their automated systems should have been able to crack any legitimate encryption scheme. Cross responded carefully. Our assessment is that the intercept likely represents either corrupted transmission data or deliberate disinformation designed to waste analytical resources. The absence of recognizable encryption patterns suggests the characters may be meaningless. Elena felt a surge of confidence. Sir, if the characters were meaningless, the spacing patterns would be random. But the intervals follow precise mathematical relationships that are consistent with interval masking applications. The pattern recognition is too complex to be accidental. She pulled out her notebook and began walking through the spacing calculations, demonstrating how the intervals converted to coordinate values and how those coordinates formed coherent geographic patterns. Her explanation was technical but clear, supported by mathematical evidence that was difficult to dismiss. Dr. Webb attempted another challenge. Ms. Vasquez, even accepting your spacing analysis, the coordinate interpretation requires numerous assumptions about reference systems and conversion protocols. You've chosen parameters that support your predetermined conclusions. Elena had anticipated this objection. She opened to a different section of her notebook, showing alternative parameter sets that still yielded coordinates pointing to Berlin infrastructure. Dr. Webb, I've tested multiple conversion protocols and reference systems. The target locations remain consistent across different mathematical approaches. The coordinate patterns aren't dependent on specific assumptions. Lieutenant Kim tried a different approach. Ms. Vasquez, your analysis timeline is concerning. You've reached these conclusions after just 2 days of investigation, while our team has spent 3 weeks applying sophisticated analytical methods. That suggests either remarkable insight or significant analytical oversight. Elena felt the weight of the challenge but also recognized an opportunity to address the fundamental difference between her approach and theirs. Ma'am, the timeline reflects the difference between looking for digital signatures and recognizing spatial patterns. Once you understand that interval masking operates through mathematical relationships rather than computational algorithms, the decryption process becomes straightforward. Major Cross had been listening to the exchange with growing intensity. Elena sensed that he was genuinely wrestling with the implications of her analysis, caught between institutional loyalty and the possibility that she might be correct about both the encryption method and the threat assessment. "Ms. Vasquez," Cross said finally, "your claims require verification before any action can be taken. I'm ordering a comprehensive review of your analysis by independent cryptographic experts. If your interval masking interpretation is correct, it will be confirmed through proper channels." Elena felt both relief and apprehension. Independent review meant her work would be taken seriously, but it also meant exposure to experts who might identify flaws she'd overlooked. More critically, it meant delay at a time when the Berlin summit was approaching rapidly. "Sir, I appreciate the opportunity for review, but given the timing implications of the threat assessment, delay could be dangerous. If the coordinate analysis is correct, we have limited time to implement security measures." Cross's expression hardened. "Ms. Vasquez, that decision is well above your authority level. Your responsibility is to provide accurate analysis, not to determine operational responses. The review process will proceed according to established protocols." Elena realized she had pushed as far as institutional hierarchy would allow. She gathered her materials and prepared to leave, knowing that her confrontation with the analysis team had probably ended any possibility of continuing her investigation. But she also knew that her mathematical evidence was solid, regardless of whether anyone chose to act on it. As she reached the door, Major Cross spoke again. "Ms. Vasquez, understand that if your analysis proves incorrect, there will be serious consequences for your career. Making false threat assessments is a grave matter in intelligence work." Elena turned back to face him, meeting his gaze directly. "Sir, I understand the risks. But if my analysis proves correct and no action is taken, the consequences could extend far beyond anyone's career." She left conference room 7, knowing that the next few days would determine whether her interval masking analysis would save lives or end her intelligence career. The woman they dismissed as an archive clerk had just challenged the institutional assumptions of NATO's elite cryptographic team. The mathematical evidence was on her side, but institutional power operated according to different rules then. Mathematical truth. Elena returned to the archives, her mind racing with the implications of what had just occurred. She had forced the intelligence establishment to confront the possibility that their most sophisticated systems had failed where traditional analysis succeeded. Whether they would accept that possibility or find ways to discredit her conclusions remained to be seen. The clock was ticking toward the Berlin summit, and Elena Vasquez had done everything within her power to warn about the threats hidden in 27 characters that had defeated NATO's best technological resources. Now she could only wait to see whether mathematical truth would triumph over institutional inertia, or whether the archive clerk's warnings would be dismissed until it was too late to matter. Elena spent the following 3 days in professional limbo, maintaining her regular archive duties while waiting for word about the independent review of her analysis. Major Cross had made it clear that she was to continue her assigned responsibilities and avoid any further unauthorized investigation of the intercepted message. The tension was suffocating. She knew that dangerous events were potentially unfolding, while bureaucratic processes ground slowly forward. On Thursday morning, Elena received an unexpected visitor in the archives. Commander Patricia Morrison, NATO's Deputy Director of Intelligence, arrived without fanfare or advance notice. Elena had seen Morrison only in briefing photographs, but her reputation was legendary, a former field operative who had transitioned to strategic intelligence and earned respect throughout the international community. "Ms. Vasquez," Morrison said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from decades of high-stakes decision-making. "I've reviewed your interval masking analysis. Walk me through your methodology." Elena felt her heart rate accelerate as she realized this was likely her final opportunity to present her case. Morrison's presence suggested that Elena's analysis had reached the highest levels of NATO intelligence. But whether that was positive or negative remained unclear. Elena opened her notebooks and began explaining the mathematical principles underlying interval masking. Morrison listened with the focused attention of someone accustomed to processing complex information quickly. Unlike Major Cross and his team, Morrison asked technical questions that demonstrated genuine understanding of cryptographic theory and spatial analysis. "Your coordinate calculations are compelling," Morrison said after Elena had finished her presentation. "But I need to understand the certainty level of your threat assessment. Intelligence work requires distinguishing between mathematical possibilities and operational probabilities." Elena had been preparing for this question. "Ma'am, the coordinate precision and timing correlations exceed statistical significance by several orders of magnitude. The probability that these patterns represent coincidental arrangements is essentially zero. The threat assessment follows directly from the mathematical evidence." Morrison studied the maps Elena had prepared, tracing the route patterns with her finger. These target locations, transportation hubs, communication centers, power distribution, the classic infrastructure. Disruption targets. If someone were planning coordinated attacks during the summit, these would be logical choices. Elena felt a surge of validation. Morrison was treating her analysis as legitimate intelligence rather than mathematical speculation. "Ma'am, the timing sequences embedded in the spacing patterns correlate precisely with the summit schedule. The operational window appears to be very narrow, likely during the opening ceremonies when media attention and security focus are concentrated on the conference center." Morrison closed the notebook and fixed Elena with an intense stare. "Ms. Vasquez, your analysis has created a significant dilemma. The mathematical evidence is persuasive, but implementing security measures based on your conclusions would require enormous resource allocation and international coordination. If you're wrong, the political and professional consequences would be severe for everyone involved." Elena understood the weight of Morrison's position. Acting on the analysis of an archive clerk could damage careers and international relationships if the threat proved illusory. But failing to act if the threat was real could result in casualties and security failures that would be far worse. "Ma'am, I understand the difficulties my analysis creates, but the mathematical evidence stands regardless of institutional considerations. The coordinates point to specific targets. The timing correlates with summit activities, and the encryption method explains why automated systems failed to detect the threat." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, apparently weighing factors that Elena could only imagine. "Ms. Vasquez, I'm going to ask something unprecedented. I want you to personally brief the summit security coordinators this afternoon. Your analysis will be evaluated by operational experts who can assess threat credibility and implementation requirements." Elena felt simultaneously elated and terrified. She was being given the opportunity to present her case to the people responsible for summit security, but she was also being exposed to scrutiny from experts whose professional reputations depended on accurate threat assessment. "Ma'am, I'm honored by the opportunity, but I should mention that Major Cross has expressed concerns about my qualifications for strategic intelligence work." Morrison's expression hardened slightly. "Ms. Vasquez, Major Cross is an excellent administrator, but his expertise is in automated systems and protocol management. Strategic threat assessment requires different skills. I'm more concerned with the accuracy of your analysis than with your job classification." That afternoon, Elena found herself in NATO's primary briefing room, facing a gathering of security officials from multiple countries. The room was equipped with digital displays and secure communication systems that linked directly to intelligence centers across Europe. Elena had never operated in such a high-level environment, but she forced herself to focus on the mathematical evidence rather than the professional stakes. She began with the technical explanation of interval masking, demonstrating how spatial relationships could encode information invisible to digital analysis. Several attendees asked sophisticated questions about cryptographic theory, suggesting they understood the implications of her methodology. When Elena shifted to the threat assessment, the atmosphere in the room became notably more tense. She displayed the coordinate patterns on the main screen, showing how the spacing intervals converted to geographic locations throughout Berlin. The precision was undeniable. The targets formed a coherent network of infrastructure nodes that would maximize disruption if attacked simultaneously. Colonel Andreas Weber, the German security coordinator, leaned forward intently. Ms. Vasquez, these target locations align closely with our vulnerability assessments for the summit. Someone with operational knowledge would need to select such strategically effective targets. Elena felt validation from an unexpected source. Sir, the target selection suggests sophisticated planning and detailed knowledge of Berlin's infrastructure networks. The coordination required would indicate a well-organized operation rather than opportunistic threats. Director Francesca Romano from Italian intelligence raised a critical concern. Ms. Vasquez, your timing analysis suggests the operational window begins tomorrow evening. That provides extremely limited time for implementing comprehensive security measures. Are you certain about the temporal correlations? Elena had double-checked her timing calculations repeatedly, knowing that accuracy was crucial for operational planning. Ma'am, the spacing intervals encode precise chronological sequences that correlate with summit scheduling. The mathematical patterns indicate coordinated timing rather than general timeframes. The implications were sobering. If Elena's analysis was correct, hostile operatives were already in position for attacks that would begin during the summit's opening events. The security officials exchanged glances that conveyed the magnitude of the decisions they were facing. Commander Morrison addressed the room with the authority of someone accustomed to crisis management. Ladies and gentlemen, we have compelling mathematical evidence of specific threats with precise timing and targeting. We need to decide whether to implement emergency security protocols based on cryptographic analysis that our traditional systems failed to detect. Colonel Weber spoke first. The German Federal Police can implement enhanced security at the identified targets, but we need certainty about the threat credibility. False alarms would damage international confidence in our security capabilities. Director Romano nodded in agreement. Italian intelligence can provide additional resources, but we need consensus about threat probability. Ms. Vasquez's analysis is mathematically sophisticated, but the operational implications are enormous. Elena realized that her mathematical evidence, however compelling, was being filtered through political and professional calculations that extended far beyond cryptographic accuracy. The officials needed to balance threat prevention against resource allocation, international relations, and career consequences. Major Cross, who had been observing silently from the back of the room, finally spoke. With respect to Ms. Vasquez's analytical work, we should consider the source. This assessment comes from an archive clerk with no formal training in threat evaluation or operational intelligence. Elena felt the familiar sting of professional dismissal, but Commander Morrison responded before she could defend herself. Major Cross, the source of analysis matters less than its accuracy. Ms. Vasquez has identified patterns that defeated our most sophisticated systems. Her mathematical credentials are impeccable. The tension in the room was palpable as institutional. Hierarchy clashed with analytical evidence. Elena understood that she was witnessing a fundamental conflict between traditional authority structures and unconventional intelligence sources. Dr. Webb, who had also attended the briefing, attempted to support Major Cross's position. Commander Morrison, while Ms. Vasquez's pattern recognition is impressive, Her threat assessment lacks supporting intelligence from conventional sources. We have no corroborating evidence of hostile activity in Berlin. Elena felt compelled to respond. Dr. Webb, the absence of corroborating evidence might reflect the sophistication of the operation rather than the absence of threats. If hostile operatives are using encryption methods designed to evade digital detection, they might also be using operational methods that avoid conventional surveillance. The logic was uncomfortable but persuasive. Elena was suggesting that the intelligence community's failure to detect supporting evidence might indicate the effectiveness of hostile planning rather than the absence of actual threats. Commander Morrison called for a brief recess to allow consultation with higher authorities. Elena found herself alone in the briefing room, surrounded by the maps and calculations that represented either her greatest professional achievement or her most spectacular failure. When the officials reconvened, Morrison announced their decision with the gravity appropriate to the circumstances. Based on the mathematical evidence and the potential consequences of inaction, we are implementing enhanced security protocols. At the identified targets, Ms. Vasquez, your analysis has been accepted as credible intelligence requiring operational response. Elena felt a mixture of relief and terror. Her interval masking analysis had been validated at the highest levels, but she was now personally responsible for security measures that would affect thousands of people and international relations. Across Europe, Colonel Weber addressed Elena directly. Ms. Vasquez, we need you to remain available for consultation as security operations proceed. Your understanding of the mathematical patterns may be crucial for interpreting any additional intelligence. Elena nodded, understanding that her role had fundamentally changed from archive clerk to active intelligence analyst. The woman who had been dismissed as unqualified for strategic work was now integral to NATO's crisis response. As the briefing concluded, Elena gathered her materials with hands that trembled slightly from adrenaline and exhaustion. Tomorrow would reveal whether her mathematical analysis had prevented a catastrophe or generated an expensive false alarm. The interval masking patterns that had seemed like academic curiosity just days earlier were now driving security operations. Across European capitals, Elena left the briefing room knowing that her career and reputation hung in the balance of events she had set in motion but could no longer control. The coordinates hidden in 27 characters would either vindicate her analytical methods or demonstrate the dangers of trusting unconventional intelligence sources. The next 24 hours would determine whether the archive clerk's mathematical insights had saved NATO from disaster or created an international incident based on spatial patterns that meant nothing at all. Elena spent Friday evening in a secure communications center, monitoring security operations across Berlin. As enhanced protection measures were implemented at the target locations her analysis had identified. Banks of monitors displayed live feeds from transportation hubs, communication centers, and power distribution facilities. Radio chatter from German federal police units created a constant backdrop of professional tension. Commander Morrison had established Elena as the primary analytical consultant, positioning her beside operational coordinators who could implement changes based on real-time intelligence. It was a responsibility Elena had never imagined holding, but the mathematical patterns embedded in the interval masking remained her unique expertise. At 8:15 p.m., the first confirmation arrived. Colonel Weber's voice crackled through the secure communication system with urgent precision. Control, we have suspicious activity at target designation Alpha 7. 3 individuals conducting surveillance of the main communication hub. Positioning and equipment suggest operational reconnaissance. Elena felt her pulse accelerate as the first piece of external validation emerged. The coordinates she had derived from spacing patterns were correlating with actual hostile activity. Her mathematical analysis was transitioning from theoretical possibility to operational reality. Director Romano's voice followed minutes later. Control, we're observing coordinated movement patterns at multiple target locations. Timing appears synchronized with Ms. Vasquez's chronological projections. Request guidance on intervention protocols. Elena found herself at the center of crisis management operations. Her notebook open beside radio equipment as security officials implemented responses based on her mathematical calculations. The transformation from archive clerk to strategic intelligence analyst was happening in real time, driven by events that validated her unconventional methods. At 9:30 p.m., the situation escalated dramatically. Colonel Weber reported the discovery of explosive devices at 2 separate infrastructure targets, concealed exactly as Elena's coordinate analysis had predicted. The devices were sophisticated, designed for maximum disruption with timing mechanisms, set for the following morning during the summit's opening ceremonies. Commander Morrison addressed Elena directly as bomb disposal teams moved to secure the threats. Ms. Vasquez, your analysis has prevented what could have been catastrophic attacks. The coordination and timing match your mathematical projections. Precisely. Elena felt overwhelming relief mixed with professional vindication. The interval masking interpretation that Major Cross had dismissed as mystical pattern recognition had accurately predicted hostile operations that conventional intelligence methods had failed to detect. Her mathematical approach had succeeded, where automated systems and digital algorithms had missed critical threats entirely. The validation continued throughout the night as security sweeps identified additional operatives and equipment at locations corresponding to Elena's coordinate calculations. The hostile network was extensive and sophisticated, using operational methods designed to evade conventional surveillance while implementing plans encoded in spatial mathematics that predated digital cryptography. By dawn on Saturday, German security forces had neutralized what intelligence assessment later confirmed as the most sophisticated infrastructure attack planned against a NATO summit in the organization's history. The coordination required had involved operatives from multiple hostile services working with timing precision that would have maximized casualties and political impact. Elena found herself in NATO's executive briefing room, presenting after action analysis to officials whose respect she had earned through mathematical accuracy rather than institutional authority. The transformation was complete. The woman dismissed as unqualified for strategic intelligence work was now briefing the deputy director on cryptographic methods that had defeated the Alliance's most advanced analytical systems. Ms. Vasquez, Commander Morrison said during the morning briefing, your interval masking analysis has fundamentally changed our understanding of contemporary cryptographic threats. The hostiles were using techniques specifically designed to exploit our reliance on automated processing. Elena felt the weight of professional validation, but also understood the broader implications of what had occurred. Ma'am, the success of this operation suggests that hostile intelligence services understand our analytical methodologies well enough to develop countermeasures. Traditional mathematical approaches may be more relevant than we assumed. Major Cross, who had been conspicuously quiet during the crisis operations, finally addressed Elena directly. Ms. Vasquez, I owe you a significant apology. Your analytical methods proved superior to our automated systems when it mattered most. My assumptions about traditional techniques were clearly misguided. The acknowledgement was genuine, carrying the weight of professional humility that Elena had never expected to hear from Cross. Dr. Webb and Lieutenant Kim nodded in agreement, their earlier skepticism replaced by recognition that Elena's unconventional approach had succeeded where their sophisticated systems had failed. Elena responded with characteristic understatement. Major Cross, the situation demonstrated that different analytical approaches have different strengths. Mathematical pattern recognition and automated processing can complement each other rather than competing. Commander Morrison smiled at Elena's diplomatic response. But her next announcement carried implications that would reshape Elena's entire career. Ms. Vasquez, effective immediately. You're being transferred to the Strategic Analysis Division as Senior Cryptographic Specialist. Your new responsibilities will include developing training programs that integrate traditional mathematical methods with contemporary digital analysis. Elena felt the magnitude of the transformation that had occurred in less than a week. She had progressed from archive clerk to senior analyst based entirely on mathematical competence that others had dismissed as obsolete. The interval masking analysis that had seemed like academic curiosity had become the foundation for career advancement that exceeded her wildest expectations. The formal briefing concluded with Commander Morrison outlining Elena's new role in developing analytical protocols that would prevent future intelligence failures. Elena would lead a team responsible for identifying cryptographic blind spots in automated systems and training analysts to recognize patterns that digital processing might miss. As the officials dispersed, Elena remained in the briefing room, surrounded by the maps and calculations that had transformed her professional life. Sergeant Kumar appeared in the doorway, carrying a folder that contained Elena's official transfer orders and new security clearances. Ms. Vasquez, Kumar said with obvious pride, I told you the archive work would prove more interesting than most people assumed. Though I admit I never expected it to lead to this level of career advancement. Elena laughed, feeling genuine affection for the man who had supported her analytical work when others dismissed it as clerical overreach. Sergeant Kumar, none of this would have happened without your encouragement and your meticulous filing systems. The historical precedents in your archives provided the foundation for everything that followed. Kumar handed her the transfer documentation with a formal salute that carried genuine respect. Ms. Vasquez, it's been an honor working with someone who understands that the most important discoveries often come from unexpected sources. Elena's new office was located on the 7th floor, with windows overlooking the Brussels skyline and workspace equipped with both digital terminals and traditional analytical materials. Her first official act was requesting that her worn leather, messenger bag, and handwritten notebooks be transferred from the archives, along with the historical files that had provided crucial context for her interval masking analysis. Dr. Webb visited Elena's new office that afternoon, carrying technical manuals about quantum cryptography and digital processing systems. His manner was notably different from their earlier interactions, respectful rather than dismissive, collaborative rather than competitive. Ms. Vasquez, Webb said, I'd like to discuss integration possibilities between mathematical pattern recognition and automated processing. Your interval masking success suggests we've been overlooking analytical opportunities by focusing exclusively on digital methods. Elena appreciated the gesture of professional reconciliation. Dr. Webb, I think there's enormous potential for hybrid approaches that combine computational power with human pattern recognition. Each method has strengths that could compensate for the other's limitations. Lieutenant Kim joined the discussion, bringing operational perspectives about field applications of cryptographic analysis. Her earlier skepticism about Elena's qualifications had been replaced by genuine interest in learning mathematical techniques that complemented her digital expertise. Ms. Vasquez, Kim said, your approach to the Berlin intercept suggests that hostile services may be deliberately exploiting our technological assumptions. Training programs that address those vulnerabilities could significantly improve our analytical effectiveness. Elena found herself designing educational curricula that integrated historical cryptographic methods with contemporary digital analysis. The training programs would teach analysts to recognize when automated systems might miss important patterns and provide mathematical tools for addressing those analytical gaps. 3 months later, Elena stood before NATO's annual intelligence conference, delivering a keynote presentation about the integration of traditional and digital cryptographic methods. The audience included intelligence officials from member nations, representing the institutional establishment that had once dismissed her as unqualified for strategic work. The Berlin Summit intercept demonstrated that hostile intelligence services understand our analytical methodologies well enough to develop specific countermeasures, Elena explained to the attentive audience. Effective intelligence analysis requires combining computational processing with mathematical pattern recognition that operates independently of digital assumptions. The presentation was received with the kind of professional attention that Elena had once thought impossible to achieve. Questions from the audience reflected genuine interest in understanding how interval masking and similar techniques could enhance rather than compete with automated systems. Colonel Weber, who had coordinated the Berlin security operations, approached Elena after her presentation. Ms. Vasquez, the German Federal Police would like to implement your training protocols for our cryptographic analysts. The techniques that prevented the summit attacks could have applications for domestic security operations. Elena felt deep satisfaction in knowing that her mathematical methods were being adopted by intelligence services across Europe. The analytical approach that had seemed obsolete was proving valuable for addressing contemporary security challenges that defeated CONVENTIONL digital processing. Elena's transformation was complete 6 months after her first encounter with the mysterious intercept. She had progressed from archive clerk to senior analyst to international expert in hybrid cryptographic analysis. Her mathematical notebooks, once mocked as outdated curiosities, were now studied by intelligence professionals seeking to understand pattern recognition methods that complemented automated processing. The woman who had been called worthless by Major Cross was now developing training programs that would reshape intelligence analysis throughout NATO. Her interval masking expertise had not only prevented catastrophic attacks, but had demonstrated that unconventional analytical approaches could provide critical capabilities that sophisticated technology alone could not achieve. Elena maintained her office on the 7th floor, but she often returned to the archives to consult with Sergeant Kumar and access historical files that provided context for contemporary analytical challenges. The basement filing systems that had seemed like professional exile were now recognized as valuable research resources that complemented digital databases. Standing in her office overlooking Brussels, Elena reflected on the mathematical journey that had transformed her career and potentially saved countless lives. The spacing patterns in 27 characters had revealed not just operational plans for terrorist attacks, but fundamental gaps in contemporary intelligence analysis that required unconventional solutions. Elena Vasquez had proven that sometimes the most important discoveries come from the least expected sources, and that mathematical truth operates independently of institutional hierarchy or technological sophistication. The archive clerk who decoded the message that saved NATO had become living proof that analytical competence matters more than professional credentials when lives hang in the balance. Her story would be remembered as a testament to the value of persistence, mathematical precision, and the courage to challenge established assumptions when evidence pointed toward uncomfortable truths. Elena had demonstrated that in intelligence work, as in mathematics, the most elegant solutions often come from understanding patterns that others have learned to ignore. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.